welcome to the Whisky Sisters podcast. I am Inka Larissa.
And I am Jennifer Rose.
Together, we will be bringing you a weekly whiskey podcast where we'll be discovering drams, exploring distilleries, talking to industry experts, and sharing other whiskey adventures.
Not only will we be sticking our noses into our drams, but also into all things new and current in the whisky universe, with a leading commentary, of course.
You're listening to Whisky Sisters, the podcast.
Today we are talking Cigar Malt with a special guest from Tomintoul.
We will also sip and sample Tomintoul Cigar Malt, as well as Glencadam Reserva Andalucia. But first, let's stick our noses into the latest whisky news.
Stick your nose in it.
Blackened American Whiskey, which was featured on the first episode of this season, has announced an exciting new venture with none other than James Hetfield and master distiller and blender Rob Dietrich, who we had on the podcast, and Drew Estate Cigars. So basically they've collaborated to create a special blackened M81 Maduro cigar. So the cigar is said to have notes of espresso, leather and dark chocolate.
So that's actually really funny that you asked Rob during our recording about cigar pairings and special cigar malts while he was actually working on a cigar to pair with the whiskey rather than whiskey to pair with cigar.
I know. And he was sort of like teasing that there was big news coming and we tried to squeeze it out of him, but of course he couldn't tell us. But that is quite exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, now I know what to get you for Christmas.
Oh, yes, please. And do you know that the M is for Metallica and 81 is because that's the year the band were formed. So that's quite nice.
What? Oh, no, I didn't know that. I thought that was just like the type of cigar or something.
Yeah, it's quite nice, isn't it?
Yeah, good stuff. So Benriach has these cool annual releases known as malting season and smoked season. And they've just released the second edition. And these reflect traditional methods of whiskey making dating back to the earliest days of the Speyside distillery. So for this year's Benriach malting season edition, master blender Rachel Barry selected Concerto barley and slightly increased the barrel strength. The floor malting method is a process requiring a team of craftspeople. Yeah, because you can't say craftsmen anymore. After steeping in water, the barley is spread across the malting room floor and turned by hand over several days to allow the germination of the barley. The result is a whiskey with a nose of malt sweetness with barley sugar and mandarin covered in white chocolate.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, the palate is honeycomb infused with citrus and orchard apple before a finish of fruit, malt, and vanilla cream. Smoke season is made using 100% peated malt, batch distilled and matured in first fill bourbon barrels, combined with a high proportion of charred and toasted American virgin oak casks. Made with Highland peat, sourced from the mainland, which is made from trees and heather. And on the nose, it's barbecue smoked fruits in a pine forest with caramel smoke and cinnamon spice roasted apple on the palate.
I think it's quite a cool concept, isn't it? Like the whole malting season edition. It's not something I'd thought about before.
No, I would like to try them both.
Definitely. So when I started to research into this episode, I realised there aren't actually a huge amount of cigar malts available at all. The Dalmore released Cigar Malt Reserve at 44% ABV, which is matured in American white oak ex-bourbon barrels, Matusalem, Oloroso sherry casks and Cabernet Sauvignon barriques. I haven't tried it as it's not that widely available anymore. It's said to have the aroma of cinnamon, vanilla and red fruits, and on the palate you can expect tropical fruits, banana toffee, vanilla ice cream with a finish of dark chocolate and spices.
Actually sounds really nice. Unfortunately, I don't think they gave any indication of what type of cigars this would be paired with. Like, surely it doesn't pair well with just any cigar.
Yeah, they say the body and character of the whiskey pairs well with a fine cigar, although I did do some digging and found out that the Cuban cigar that provided the flavour benchmark for pairing is the Partagas Serie D No. 4. So I haven't tried this cigar, but reviews describe the body as is medium in the first half with, rich flavours of cocoa, cedar and sweet baking spice. And in the second half of the cigar describes the strength increasing to medium full with floral notes, a complex bouquet, remaining smooth and creamy through to the finish.
I can see why people actually pair cigars with whiskey, if they actually give that kind of tasting notes to cigars as well.
It's so similar, isn't it? That experience and right through to the finish.
I also found out that Tamdu has released 2 cigar malts, one in 2021, and the most recent one, I think it was only last month. But yeah, I know. I think it still seems like it's sold out everywhere. When I was looking up online, it just sold out or it wasn't available. And they said that they released 1,000 bottles and that's split in few countries. So there's definitely an interest in these bottlings as they seem to go so fast.
Definitely flying off the shelves.
Exactly. And the second cigar malt, bottled at 53.8% ABV, has been carefully crafted to complement the complex aroma and mouthfeel of a handmade cigar. Created using a small selection of first fill European oak sherry casks with a robust character, this is a dram dedicated to the richness and strength of some cigars. And there's ginger, dark chocolate, and golden syrup on the nose. Palate is full of sherry-soaked fruits, gingerbread, and treacle with a nutty finish with a hint of orange and apricot.
Oh, these tasting notes are just delicious so far this episode, aren't they?
Yeah.
Up in smoke.
So as you know, Inka, I'm an occasional cigar smoker and by no means a cigar aficionado. I would tend to feel like pairing whiskey, usually with a wee mini cigarillo, more than a full-on cigar, although I do enjoy them occasionally. I just think what a big commitment of time a full cigar is. You need to be relaxed and, have time. And so perhaps I'm too busy to enjoy them more regularly. But the minis are often made of the same blend of tobacco. So as I say, I'm fairly novice in terms of cigars, but I enjoy Monte Cristo classics and they have notes of almond, toffee and cedar. So for me, this pairs really nicely with a dram with gentle sweetness, maybe not too sweet. So for me, such as Bunnahabhain Toy Chicago with that touch of smoke and the sherry influence, or Ardnamurchan's core release that's 50% peated and 50% unpeated. So for me that's quite complementary. But again, newly thinking about cigar and whiskey pairings, I don't have too much to kind of recommend. But some people suggest thinking about that harmony of flavours. If you love a rich and spicy whiskey, perhaps choosing an earthier cigar or one that's on the sweeter side to complement the whiskey. And the opposite works for spicier cigars, which pairs nicely with a whiskey that's sweeter with more caramel notes. But yes, I guess like everything, personal preferences always play a part. And if I've had a few drams and I see a cigar, I just kind of want to light it up and I'm not that bothered what it is.
Yeah. So of course there's a third brand of cigar malt as well, and that is Tomintoul. So let's chat with Iain Forteath, the master blender at Tomintoul, to hear more about their release and the type of cigar it is best paired with.
Iain Forteath.
Today, we would like to welcome Iain Forteath to Whisky Sisters podcast. So glad you could make it, Iain.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So could you start by telling our listeners a little bit about your role at Glencadam and Tomintoul?
Yeah, so I've got a rather long job title now, but yes, I'm Master Blender at Angus Dundee Distillers. I'm Global Brand Ambassador as well, so I do a bit of everything. My job with Angus Dundee, I started with them as Global Brand Ambassador back in 2015, and it turns out having a big schnoz is good for something. So no, I've always... I ended up becoming part of the kind of sensory panel from about 2016 onwards, and then that job kind of progressed. So I became part of the blending side, and now my role's kind of flipped. So I still do a bit of travel, but Cody Reynolds is now our kind of European brand ambassador. He looks after a lot of our markets where I would usually be. And these days I'm mainly on a lab rather than jet setting quite as much as I used to. It's pretty cool. I mean, I love it. It's not a bad job.
So as a master blender, you must have some mega skills to find the right balance when you're mixing whiskies. So what would you say is the most challenging aspect of blending whiskey?
I think it's just, so funnily enough, within whiskey, like the hardest things to do are the things which are the most mass market. So actually for us, so single casks are the easiest part of being a master blender because all I do is pick a really nice cask and then write some paper. Ironically, in the flip side, kind of in the whiskey world and the whiskey geeks, which I very fondly keep myself in that group. It's not meant in a term of detriment at all. But for them, that's the stuff that they really, really love. So that's the easy bit. Whereas making a standard blend that might be big in several markets, the same batch on batch is the hard part.
Finding the consistency.
Yeah, because your ingredients, I mean, your recipe always ends up getting tweaked thereabouts because your ingredients are always changing. I compare it to like cooking. If there's a recipe you make all the time, some years kind of you'll need to adjust that. You might need to put a bit more oregano, you might need to put a bit more kind of whatever it may be into your recipe to keep that taste the way you'd remember it. And blending is very much the same. So your recipe is always changing. And actually, it's the maintenance of bigger products or even just like core range stuff. So like a Tomintoul 16 is always kind of, we do a new batch, people know what it tastes like. So you need to make sure it tastes the same.
So how many whiskeys would you say that you, like what's the most you blended in one to create one whiskey?
The most casks?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I suppose, I mean, our biggest vat that we have at Angus Dundee is 100,000 litres. So that probably gives you a good estimate of scale. But I think, that would probably be your kind of largest batch, which is funnily enough, I mean, we're not massive compared to some of the other whiskey companies either. So, I mean, that'd be a few hundred casks. But yeah, most products we do tend to be in the kind of, for single malts, tends to be in the kind of 10 to kind of 30 bracket. For blends can be, a fair bit more. But yeah, it's lots of nosing and lots of tasting, which again is not too bad. I can't.
Not too much of a hardship.
Yeah.
Now, like you might have to sit in the fence professionally for this, Iain, but we would love to know: do you have a favourite between Glencadam and Tomintoul? I have done some tastings with you, and I'm just going to put it out there. I'm Team Glencadam all the way. I was like, yes, I've been raving about it to everyone that will listen. And what would you say is the key difference, maybe between the whiskies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things with having two kind of well-known malt brands that people always pick a favorite. And it depends on my mood. I must admit, I have a real soft spot for Glencadam. I love the fact it's historic and old, and I love the fact it makes this kind of rustic style of whiskey. But actually, Tomintoul is probably the whiskey I drink the most because it kind of ticks the boxes depending on what I'm in the mood for. Tomintoul 16 is a Dram I've drunk for, and I think it's just one of these whiskies that kind of ticks all the boxes for me. So it depends what I'm in the mood for. So yeah, I kind of like them both. It's probably the diplomatic answer. But no, it depends. They're very different distilleries as well. So I think Tomintoul was built in the 60s. Glencadam was built in 1820s. I mean, they're totally different snapshots in time. Neither of which have particularly moved on, which is actually quite cool. Like they're both pretty rustic, but of their era. So Glencadam's spirit style, when you're saying about the kind of difference between them, Glencadam's very tangy and fruity and crisp, which is cool because it's kind of juxtaposing of what you'd imagine an old spirit would be.
Yeah.
And that's just due to the kind of production style. It's very ester forward, very kind of tangy, and that spice really carries under it. Tomintoul's opposite is more kind of creamy and buttery, really rounded. Even the new make at Tomintoul's got a real textural note to it, which is really delicious. It's got a kind of fleshier kind of character to it. It's probably best to like a kind of creamy, kind of bready kind of note. So a bit more of an all-rounder. I know most distilling companies always have an all-rounder. So Tomintoul's definitely are more versatile distillery, but it's also a bit bigger as well. I mean, Glencadam's not really expanded in a long time, so it's a distillery that has a smaller output.
In the previous episode, we mentioned how since the smuggling era, Glenlivet had been used as a shorthand for what we now know as Speyside whiskies.
Yeah.
So is this perhaps why a Tomintoul label's Glenlivet is still mentioned?
That's a good question. And no is actually the funny answer to it. So you're right. Once upon a time, that was like seen as the kind of stamp of approval, really. So Glenlivet, as a forerunner to any name, was it was on lots of products, including Macallan and some massive names once back in the day. But actually, we're the opposite. We're in Glenlivet, so that's why it's on our label, which is confusing. I do understand. So actually, Tomintoul Distillery is one of few which is actually in the Glenlivet estate. So we're literally just south of them. So actually, Tomintoul's original name is Tomintoul Glenlivet TG. If you see old signage, it says TG is the old badge, and that's not that they're. So the other people had it in front, whereas actually we have it as like a side runner to it. So yeah, it's actually the official name. We dropped it to Tomintoul, but we mentioned Glenlivet because it's a prestigious area.
Yeah.
If it were up to me, I think it's one of these things that it has its nice kind of heritage nod to it, but it confuses people. Lots of people ask if I work for Glenlivet, and I'm sure, Pernod Ricard have a little bit more money than Angus Dundee. So yeah, we haven't got a private jet for my travels yet. But yeah, so they are richer neighbours, but no, we're not piggybacking on them if that helps. But it's good to myth bust that though, because lots of people ask that question.
Yeah. It's always, there's so much information on some labels, and I think it's good to know how to read the labels and understand what everything means. So
yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think I was trying to explain this actually when I was on my most recent trip, because I was speaking to a real wide audience, and I think that the reason that we kind of kept it, I suppose, is kind of like an appellation sort of thing. Not going to get into that big debate of terroir and everything else, but kind of southern Speysides in particular tend to have their own sort of style. So the Glenlivet area Spearsides are quite similar profiles. So you've obviously got the Glenlivet, you've got Tamna Villain, Brave Val, which used to be called Brazen Glenlivet. These guys are all kind of similar flavour profiles. So they tend to be a bit lighter than your standard Spearsides.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, makes sense.
And that whole valley that we're based in, so the Glenlivet Valley is like the home of illicit distilling. So that is the heartland. There was about 200 odd distilleries there once upon a time.
Wow.
None of them legal. That's all the fun of it, really.
Such a cool history, actually. But Iain, we really want to hear about this award-winning cigar malt. So for our listeners, maybe if you could share why create a special malt, because some people might argue that like all whiskey would pair well with a cigar.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the reason I love what I do, the reason I do what I do is because I love flavors and I love pairings. And as you can tell, I know we're on a podcast, so for anyone on the podcast, I'm really lean and slim. But otherwise, yeah, I enjoy my food. It's definitely fair to say, and I enjoy flavors. And so the idea of doing the cigar malt as a kind of a specific whiskey for that pairing is because I'm kind of a fan of cigars, and I thought it was cool to bring that kind of that step together. If you do enjoy the odd cigar, it's kind of built for that purpose. And I suppose the best place to start would probably at the beginning of that dram, if it's okay. I can kind of talk you through why it became what it was.
Yeah, please do.
So we're not the first cigar malt in the whiskey industry. I wouldn't pretend to say we are. We're very close with White & Mackay. We know them very well. We actually bought Tomintoul Distillery from them in the year 2000. And yeah, Dalmore did it first. Their cigar malt is a whiskey I've known for a long time. I used to sell it long before I worked for Angus Dundee. I always felt within that kind of bracket that if you make one product, it's not going to cover the entire world of cigars. There's so much flavor and characteristics. So yeah, for me, being a cigar fan, I've always kind of done tastings where they're incorporated. And Tomintoul 12 was always our lean-to for our whiskey in our range that worked well. And Tomintoul 12 is a bourbon cask matured whiskey finished for 2 years and Oloroso sherry. So it's got that lovely kind of milk chocolate kind of raisin sort of note to it. Makes it pair nicely with tobacco and anything with a bit of spice to it. So that was a kind of go-to for years. And I was only going out to Hong Kong, our importer out there, or also a cigar importer, and we were doing an event, and afterwards we were sitting having a nice cigar on a kind of terrace in Hong Kong, and he was like, you guys should do a cigar malt. Like, your whiskey really suits cigars and tobacco. And yeah, it was going back to the owners and then kind of saying, well, Dalmore did it first. We're not trying to kind of steal their market. We're not trying to we're not reinventing the wheel. But actually my kind of pitch was, well, actually, why don't we make it totally different and make it for a different style cigar?
So can you tell us a bit about that, Iain? I enjoy occasional cigars, but I don't profess to know much at all, and just have a couple of brands that I would purchase if I'm feeling that way inclined. So for the cigar sort of knowing community that might be tuning in, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a selfish way, I kind of pair them towards the styles that I like.
Quite right.
So I quite enjoy like a medium to fuller bodied style cigar, generally. And I think that for me, I kind of built a whiskey around that sort of profile. Because it was instantly going to be compared to another whiskey, I wanted to make sure that it did what it says in the tin, but also that it was going to hold up to criticism. Because as soon as you bring out anything similar to anything else, it's going to kind of, people will automatically compare and contrast. Kind of tailored, so sweet and spice are two things that kind of work really well together. And the flip side of that is spice and spice don't work together. I don't know if you've ever had like a full-bodied red wine and a curry before. It doesn't work. They just butt heads. So I've done lots of different pairings where people have had cigars and cask strengths and things like that. And personally, I don't think it works because usually one thing drowns out the other. So if you do something that's super high alcohol, like high 50s or 60s, then that's what you're going to taste over the tobacco. But then the flip side is if you have something that's really spicy and bold as a cigar, then it can drown out a light whiskey. That's
really helpful to think about though, isn't it? It makes so much sense, and I hadn't really thought about it. It's more just like, I've had a couple of drams and I quite fancy that, in terms of aromas and flavours and complementing.
Yeah, it's something that I think... like I said, even if cigars aren't your thing, it's a tasty dram in its own right. And I always describe it as like a decadent after-dinner dram. It's big and it's rich and it's kind of sultry, I suppose. It's that kind of big, lots of kind of dried fruits and kind of sweet spice notes in there. There's a little bit of heat in that mix as well, which gives it that subtle smokiness to it. And so the idea is it will pair up with what is named on the tin, but also, I mean, things like blue cheese, charcuteries. I'm sure there's vegan alternatives available too. Anything kind of, chocolate is a great pairing with it as well. Something kind of rich, it's going to kind of marry well with. But so in terms of the actual makeup, it's a very kind of Oloroso driven style product. So using a lot of that rich sherry note to it. I've still got the job title, so it must be doing okay.
Well, it has won loads of awards, so.
Cigar Malt that was my first release as Master Blender. So
was it?
Yeah, so it's kind of my baby. I was going to clutch it, but I realised we're not on screen. But I've got a bit of a soft.
Oh, nice. Later on in this episode, Iain, we will be reviewing the Cigar Malt in our Dram on Fire and spending a long time giving our tasting notes.
I had so many different prototypes of this whiskey and different flavors and different balances of recipes. And it had one of these kind of eureka moments. I was like, it's really sweet and it's rich and it's great, but it's kind of missing something. And I was like, just end up incorporating just that little bit of smoke, which kind of brought it all together, I think, anyway. And the best compliment I've had on that whiskey was from Posh Scotch. I don't know if you know Iain. And we did a tasting with him, and it was with a group, and he said, "Oh, this tastes like old whiskey."
Nice.
A massive smile across my face, because I'm one of these geeks that loves to buy old blends. I love trying whiskey that has bottle age as well as physical age. So he wasn't implying it was like a 20-year-old malt. He was implying that it tasted like an old whiskey that sat in a bottle for 20 years. And to be able to kind of get that kind of flavor into whiskey, I love that flavor. I find it really interesting. So yeah, to be able to create that with whiskey that it hasn't been sitting in a bottle for that amount of time is quite a cool compliment. Hopefully you guys like it. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. It's you see what you think.
Oh, it's good to know as well that there's other pairings to go with it. So if someone is not into cigars like myself, there's other things you can do with it. Our listeners shouldn't be put off by the cigar.
And I think that's the thing. Like it implies what the whiskey style will be more than anything else. So I'm definitely not saying, go out and smoke. That's not the. I suppose it's a treat, like a lot of spirits, but you don't tend to kind of just have them because you're feeling thirsty. It's more of you're treating yourself for whatever.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's the mood.
Yeah,
I like the smell of cigars. So maybe Jen can smoke a cigar nearby, and while I'm sipping the whiskey, I can still get into the mood.
Exactly.
Are there any plans to create new cigar malts? Because obviously this one has been so popular. Do you think, maybe different types of cigars? Do you think this will be something for the future?
I suppose from our side, probably nothing from us at the moment. I think that while it's nice to have it as an extra, there's lots of other things we could call it. I mean, the Tomintoul Cigar Malt could have been named anything else, I suppose, and still be a nice whiskey to release. So yeah, I've never really thought of doing specifics.
Mm-hmm.
I have spoken to a couple of cigar manufacturers who have kind of said, we could do like an actual whiskey for a particular brand. And so that may happen at some point, but I mean,
I wondered that actually.
Yeah, they've done it in the rum world, but it's not really been the done thing in whiskey. So yeah, potentially something like that. The problem with tobacco more than whiskey is legislation. If you think that alcohol is a difficult thing, which for some reason in Scotland we're pretty prohibitive on. Yeah, the tobacco world is even more restricted. So branding and all this stuff's a bit of a logistical nightmare. So yeah, it depends.
I think it's really exciting that it's available for people to access just now, Ian. And you mentioned Dalmore earlier. That's one that we've actually not managed to try. It's been pretty hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, it's quite expensive as well, the ones that you can find.
The aim for that, I mean, the best takeaway I can kind of give for ours is the idea wasn't to kind of push them out of the way. It's to offer something totally different. I've got a bottle of Dalmore Cigar Malt in the house. In fact, Jen, if you want, I'm sure I could send you a sample.
But
it's one of these things that, and the idea wasn't to kind of compare and contrast and recreate it. It was to make something totally different.
Like, generally speaking, you did mention earlier that you like pairing and things and you like your food. So do you have any recommendations, any kind of good whiskey and snack or meals or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. How long have we got?
Just something easy to make at home.
So an amazing pairing, which is really simple but sounds posh, is a Glencadam 10-year-old with Parmesan.
Oh.
Shavings of Parmesan. And when I say shavings of Parmesan, what I mean is take a potato peeler and peel a bit of Parmesan off the side of some. The shavings part is the posh bit. But yeah, it actually works really well. So I trained in wine. I'm a wine guy that fell to the dark side is the best way I can describe it. But wine and food is so understood, and it's such a big part of the wine world and presentations and dinners and all this kind of thing is all very much about how you incorporate wine into kind of sales, really. Whereas whiskey is still under-tapped. It's developed a lot even since I joined the industry, since I kind of came to the dark side, like I said. But I've always tried to push it forward because, again, whiskey is really versatile. It's just the alcohol you've got to be careful with.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same acidity as a wine. It's got a lot going on. So yeah, so Glencadam and shavings of an aged Parmesan is really good because they're totally different flavors. But when you let that kind of cheese melt on your tongue, you get notes of like apricot and tropical fruits, which were they just emerge from the cheese, which is really bizarre. And the salt and the sweetness of Glencadam marry really well together.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
Tomintoul 16-year-old and shortbread as well. I know shortbread and whiskey is maybe a bit twee, but it works really well.
Oh, but that's cute.
The buttery style of Tomintoul spirit, that creaminess really marries well with shortbread. And Walker's shortbread are just around the corner from us. us. I should probably give him a nod.
I love that. We've thought a little bit, but not that much on the podcast, Inka, about pairings. But we were at a tasting recently, and there were certain, little snacks that really brought out different nuances on the palate. It was really interesting. So
yeah, it's good fun. I kind of got known for that in the early days when I was a brand ambassador, primarily as my job, because I used to love to do weird pairings. So I remember doing a great tasting with the guys at Robbie's Drams down at Ayr. I don't know if you know their whiskey club. It's a really cool whiskey club.
Okay.
Yeah, we did a whiskey and cheese tasting with them, and I went to Mellis. I'm trying to remember. Is it Ian Mellis? Mellis Cheeses over, and we.
That's tasty in Glasgow.
Yeah, and it was great. So I did. My research concluded of tasting about 20 odd different cheeses with all our whiskeys. It's a hard life. When I say that out loud, it doesn't sound so bad. But no, so tasting lots of different cheeses, and we did some weird combos as well. So we did hand-in-hand cheese combos, so Glencadam 17 Portwood, which is a big jammy forward dram, with Wensleydale and Cranberry, which I know is controversial.
I'm in for that. I like that sweetness.
So yeah, well, I mean, that works really well. But then we did some really weird ones. So I was doing Morbier, and which is quite a kind of pongy cheese. That's probably not the technical term for it. With like a 19-year-old Oloroso and some cool stuff. And I've done other weird tasting since, like Whiskey Biscuits, which was a pairing of 7 different Tomintoul's with biscuits and cakes that you can buy in the supermarket. Things like gingerbread and Jaffa cakes and all this kind of thing. It was good fun. Yeah, I need to do whiskey and salad, so that's going to be the next step.
Brilliant. No, I love all the tastings. It's just, you get so much more out of the whiskey and just exploring all the different flavor profiles. It's really nice. Do you do anything like that at the distillery then? Do you have any tours or anything?
Not so much at the moment. It's funny. So neither of our distilleries currently have a visitor centre. So we're actually a bit off the beaten track. We're both full production sites. So both Tomintoul and Glencadam are fully manual distilleries, but in full production. So we don't really have the capacity, as always, to kind of run regular tours. We are changing that slowly. We've actually hired a kind of part-time tour guide at Tomintoul. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can come visit if you get a chance. There's a shameless plug on your podcast. And Glencadam, we're building a very small visitor centre, which is currently in progress. But no, not really as such as a kind of standard tour. That said, I love to do Spirit of Speyside every year. I've started doing the fireside sessions.
Oh, and that's when you pair with cigars and things, am I right?
Yeah. So Tomintoul is based in the Cairngorm National Park, and we literally have mountains on all sides. It's a really stunning setting. So we have land there that I kind of set up 2 fire pits. We burn old casks and staves, and we sit and do really decadent whiskey pairings. So we've always got whiskey and cigars. We've got toasted marshmallows. Give people weird and wonderful tastings out in the wilderness. It always means that you're at the mercy of the elements is the problem. Lighting fires and cigars and things near a warehouse is not really very good. They don't let me do it at the actual distillery. We have to walk down to the river. But if you ladies wanted to come over, I'm sure we could figure out some kind of I could try some weird tastings with you. I'm sure.
Definitely.
Yes.
And I love the sound of the fireside sessions. Very much, creating memory, all that kind of atmosphere, and the pairing. I think that would be hugely impactful for anyone that attends and kind of remain with them.
Yeah, I mean, my view behind it really is that, so that's how I like my whiskey. Whiskey's a rustic product. So I like to enjoy it in the wilderness. I like to have a dram while walking or being up the hills or by a fire on the beach or whatever it may be. I think, that's kind of what it's made for. And I think that it kind of brings people together, and the whiskey itself is something that is for sharing and for kind of getting to know your neighbours effectively. And when you put people in front of a fire and you pour them drams, everyone becomes pals by the end of the night. It's a really good experience. So
create memories. And when you said, if you've been hiking or whatnot, you spend the day outdoors and then you finish it with the whiskey, it kind of brings it all together, and that's how you will then remember the whole day, the whole experience.
The way that your brain stores your memories of whiskey is right beside where your kind of memory bank is effectively.
Yep.
And smells and experiences all tie together. So I can remember drams better that I've shared in particular instances than remembering a dram itself.
Absolutely.
And yeah, you're right. If it kind of frames a moment, I suppose, if you see it as that's a kind of crowning part of whatever it was you were doing, it's pretty cool.
Thanks for all the information. We're really looking forward to trying this whiskey now. Might even get some pairings to go with it when we do our notes. So we like to end these interviews to find out about your dream dram. So which famous person, dead or alive, would you like to share a dram with, and which whiskey would you go for?
It's a very good question. And I think I've got kind of 2 avenues for this, if it helps. I would love to have a dram with John Walker or Tommy Dewar, or one of the founding fathers of whiskey blending. And I just think it would be really cool to compare and contrast, but also
Yeah.
kind of, these guys are the guys that kind of, they made whiskey what it is. And I think that it would be really, really cool. I love looking at old books that have old recipes and stuff, but I'd love to actually sit down and like share Dram with them. Maybe in a selfish way, show them something I've made and see what they think.
Yeah.
But I think that would be really cool. And if it was just a general celebrity and not in the whiskey world, probably Sean Connery. I think that he would be a cool guy to have had. I share his birthday, so I've always had an affiliation with Sean Connery. Although obviously he was a little bit older than myself. But yeah, 25th of August. So I feel like there's a Dram with him would be pretty cool. If it
Good
was,
choices, Ian. And what would the Dram be?
If it was with one of the blenders, then it would have to be something that took a bit of blending.
Mm-hmm.
The Cigar Malt, since we're talking about it, would be pretty cool to show them. I suppose old favourites as well. Tomintoul 16 is just a great Dram to share with people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a Dram that doesn't overlap the situation. If that, you know what I mean by that. So it's a whiskey you can enjoy, but enjoy the company too. Yeah.
And what about Sean? What would you pick for his glass?
For Sean, I don't know. I suppose I'd probably go for something a bit more rustic. Maybe some of our Glencadams. Glencadam 17 Portwood.
You would be very impressed. Well, we would like to thank you so much. It's been really lovely to have you here, Ian. And just there's so much to learn, and it's excellent to have your experience, and really looking forward to sort of seeing what's to come, both from Tomintoul and Glencadam.
Thanks, and I look forward to seeing your review on the Cigar Malt as well.
Yes.
Dram on fire.
So today we're sampling Tomintoul Cigar Malt and Glencadam Reserva Andalucia. Master distiller Robert Fleming personally selected a combination of Tomintoul single malts from specially selected vintages, which he has then balanced with some rare peaty Tomintoul single malt. Each of these individual cell malts have been either matured fully or finished in hand-selected Oloroso sherry butts. So, Inka, how was it?
Okay, so the color was pretty nice, I think. It was kind of like a golden but slightly reddish, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so aromas, I was getting maple syrup, cinnamon rolls, a little bit like a kind of bread dough or when you're making buns, and some berries. But then with air, it changed more like, we have these dark chocolate coated marmalades in Finland called Julia. So it reminded me of that. It was quite nice. And also kind of those chocolates that has booze inside.
Like kind of chocolate liqueurs.
Yeah.
Sounds like you were getting lots on the nose here, Inka, quite diverse aromas.
Yeah, and a lot of chocolate.
Yeah, I got quite a lot. I didn't detect the chocolate, but now you're saying that, it's piquing my interest. I got a very golden syrupy sweetness on the nose and kind of toffee apple. I was thinking of oat and raisin cookies, but there was also something, I want to say, well, not hugely woody, but like wood shavings. If you went into like a workshop where somebody was making things with wood, that kind of fresh wood shaving smell. I got a wee bit of that.
That's not bad. That's quite nice. That kind of low wood influence.
Yeah.
So on the palate, then it had like a little bit tingling spice that goes away quite quickly, and then it turns into more roasted coffee beans, like really dark chocolate.
No way. I've got a subtle afterkick of spice with ground coffee and dark chocolate.
There you go.
Check us out.
Brilliant. I found the finish quite short, but then I was thinking, like, it kind of makes sense that it would be a little bit short, because if you're pairing it with the cigar, surely your kind of senses in your mouth will be overtaken by the cigar.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that, but that's such a good point. I found it slightly drying on the finish, but not uncomfortably so. A little bit tobacco-ish on the finish. Then I'm going, is that just because I'm thinking so much about cigars? But a little bit of kind of, when toast is slightly burnt, but it's still pleasant. I got a little bit of burnt toast on the finish.
Yeah, I quite like a burnt toast.
Yeah.
But, I didn't really get the peat.
No.
Like, it must be a tiny, tiny percentage of peated malt, because I really didn't get any kind of smokiness at all.
No, I would agree. I think it's like super faint. I don't know if I've got, I'm glad in a way to hear that you said that as well, because sometimes I worry like, am I not detecting things? But certainly it was super subtle as far as I'm concerned. Well, I'm saying subtle. I didn't notice it.
Yeah, it was bottled at 43% ABV. I don't know, obviously I don't smoke cigars, so I don't know. I didn't have the chance to try it that way. It was nice, but I wasn't my mind wasn't blown.
I wanted to try it, and I have done without a cigar, just to kind of taste as a normal good. Haven't tried it as yet with a cigar. Looking forward to doing that to see if I have a different experience. I enjoyed it but I would concur, I'm not like raving about it. I'm not doing like a happy dance over this dram. But yeah, it was nice.
Next up is Glencadam Reserva Andalucia, which is bottled at 46% ABV. And this time, Mr. Fleming carefully chose the very best sherry butts from the dunnage warehouses at Glencadam. And once married together with bourbon casks, it was finished in Oloroso sherry butts from Andalucia.
Nice. So what were you getting on the nose for this one?
I was getting, like those, the digestives, but they also do kind of the ones with the caramel on the top. So at first I was getting that, and also red wine.
Oh.
And even it's just, I don't know, I was getting like loads of weird stuff. The pink pickled cabbage. I was getting that as well.
Brilliant.
And then at some point it changed more into like sweet cherry. Can't read my handwriting. But it just kind of became more sweeter, and I don't know, like it was just taking me all over the place.
That's cool that you were getting, that diversity of aromas. For me, it was quite straightforward in the sense it was a lot of kind of sweet notes, that treacle, brown sugar, sherry soaked raisins, cinnamony baked apples, more kind of, I guess, regular sherry kind of scents.
About the color, I thought it was quite light for a sherry whiskey.
More kind of like honeyish.
Yeah, exactly. A bit more honey yellowish. On the palate, I'm taking the red wine into red wine gums, those sweets. And then again, that pickled cabbage is turning into that ginger you get when you go to a Japanese restaurant.
Oh yeah, the little slices of that.
Yeah, so I was getting like tons of that. And then later on, it turned into more like coffee cake. We have this cake in Finland called mokkapalat, which, mocha, it's like that kind of coffee thing.
Yeah.
So the icing is flavored with coffee and the actual cake is chocolate.
So kind of carry through of some of those from the aromas onto the palate for you.
Yeah, and then eventually at the end, like there was some minty freshness that was then coming through.
I got the kind of ginger, but not the fresh. I got more the baking spice, ginger, kind of drying nutmeg, although I did find the mouthfeel quite smooth. I got that stodgy, I think I've mentioned it before, like Jamaica ginger cake. It's like really sticky, stodgy little sponge. It's so tasty. But like a little hint of licorice as well.
Yeah, and on the finish, I was getting, again, like that kind of digestive biscuit, that wheatiness, the maltiness with a little bit of cinnamon. So it was a little bit more drying and malty at the finish.
I thought it was a wee bit longer on the finish, this dram, a bit kind of but medium, not particularly long.
Yeah.
Quite gentle, quite woody, and I was finding it hard to detect much beyond that. I wasn't there weren't other descriptives jumping out at me on the finish.
No, same, exactly. But I did enjoy this though. It was very light, easy sipping dram.
I thought it was lovely. I preferred this of the two. What about you, Inka?
Same.
And it's a total bargain. I'm not sure where it costs elsewhere, but in the UK it's less than £40.
That's amazing. I would actually I would drink this again for sure.
Definitely. Bargain.
Whisky Sisters, Whisky Fact.
Inka, tell us, what is a dunnage warehouse and how does it differ from the modern racked warehouse and the palletized warehouse?
Okay, so the classic dunnage warehouse is a low and often windowless building with a thick stone walls and slate and timber roof. Inside, the casks are usually stacked in rows, 2 or 3 high, and the humidity is relatively high due to the flooring being earth or cinder, and the thick walls and low capacity allow low and even temperatures throughout the day and even months and years, when the poorer insulation makes for much greater degree of temperature variation in racked or palletized warehouses, especially between the highest and the lowest rows of casks. So basically, if you have a palletized or racked warehouse, maybe the bottom layer will be similar to the casks in dunnage. Like the temperature stays and is a bit more even. And dunnage warehouses are expensive to run since they can store relatively small number of casks. There you go.
Love it.
You've been listening to the Whisky Sisters podcast.
Thank you for listening. Next week, we will take you to Ireland as we sample single malts from Bushmills Distillery.
So pour yourself a dram and join us next Wednesday. Also, head to our Instagram at whiskysisters.podcast, where we are running a very special Halloween giveaway.
Ooh. And check out our Halloween video, especially if you're a fan of the Lost Boys movie. And if you've seen it, why wouldn't you be a fan of the Lost Boys movie? I know everybody's not as obsessed as me, Inka, but it's a good film, right?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen it fully. Only bits of it.
But you were a good sport for our video,
Yeah.
for sure.
And you can also chat to us on Twitter at Whisky Sisters or Facebook at Whisky Sisters Podcast.
May your glass be full.
And your dram on fire.